All right, 7th graders, lesson 5.1 is about finding multiples of numbers and then finding the lowest common multiple. Meaning it's the lowest multiple that they have in common. So multiples, how do you find multiples? You count by the number. Or you multiply the number by 1, and then by 2, and then by 3. So if you were asked the question, what is the 5th multiple of 4? The 5th multiple of 4 is 20 because 5 times 4 is 20. Okay? What is the 6th multiple of 6? 6 is the multiple of 6. Then you would multiply 6 times 6, which is 36. Yep. When you have two numbers, they will have more than one number in common. That's a common multiple. So for example, if you have 4 and 6 and you had to find a common multiple, you could find 24 by multiplying the two numbers together. But is that the lowest common multiple? Maya. Is that the lowest common multiple of 4 and 6? Is 24 the lowest common multiple? What is the lowest common multiple? 12, because 4 goes into 12 and 6 goes into 12, and that's lower than 24. Okay? Now, there's a procedure that you can use to find the lowest common multiple. It's not always that simple. Many of them you'll be able to find just by looking at the numbers and knowing the multiples of those numbers, by knowing your multiplication tables. Okay? But sometimes the numbers are bigger, and they're not multiples that you're familiar with. And so then you can use a method to find them. And what you do is you factor each number, and then you use the biggest power of each factor that is in the numbers. You'll use the biggest power of each factor in the numbers, and then multiply them together to find the lowest common multiple. Okay? So let's look at an example. 6a squared and 18a to the 3rd power. Okay? Now, the numbers that you're starting with are familiar to you. The multiples of 18 are 18 and 36. But since 6 goes into 18 and 18 goes into 18, that is the lowest common multiple, isn't it? We know that. Now, using the procedure on one like this can help you to learn how to do the procedure. So if you factored 6, you would get 2 and 3, right, Aiden? What's the factors of 18? How would we factor 18? 2 and 9, and then 3 and 3. Okay? So, in the formula, they both have 2's, and they both have 3's. They both have only one power of 2. And this one has 3 to the 2nd power. So we would use the greatest power. And that's why the lowest common multiple of these two is 2 times 3 squared. Okay? We use a 2 because there's a 2 in the numbers, and we use a 3 because there's a 3 in the numbers, but we use the 3 squared because this one has a 3 squared. Okay? Why does 3 have to be? Because we have to use each of the factors to make the lowest common multiple. we have to use all the kinds of ingredients to make the number. All right? We can't just skip the 3's because there are 3's in the numbers. Okay? Now, we would do the same thing with the variables. To find the lowest common, you would use the greatest power of the factors. There we go. And since this one has an a to the third power, but this one only has an a squared, we would use this set. Use the a to the third power as your ingredient. It's using the biggest power of each of the factors. Okay? So if there's a 5 in the number, you have to use a 5 in your formula. If there's a 7 in the number, you have to, in any of the numbers, you have to use a 7. If there's a 11 in the numbers, in either of the numbers, then you have to use a 11 in your formula. Okay? Let's try one more. In 8 and 14. Now, we're not as familiar with the multiples of 8 and 14. You don't just know, like, 14 times 7 is something, right? So, what we do is, this is pretty simple, you guys. You can get this. You factor the numbers. You all know how to factor. Make a factor tree. Factor both numbers, 2 and 7, 2, and then, so this is 2 to the third power. This number, number 14, has a 2 to the first power, but the 8 has a 2 to the third power. So we have to use a 2 to the third power in our ingredient, okay? And we have to use, we've already used 2's in our formula, but we have to use a 7 because there's a 7 in both in the numbers. So it's 2 to the third times 7 to make the lowest common multiple. The biggest power of the 2's, and we have to use a 7. Okay? Does that make sense? Now they both have m's. So we have to use m's in our formula. This one has an m to the fourth power. That's a greater power than m to the second power. So you have to use the m to the fourth. So the answer, the lowest common multiple, is, Peyton?
It's 2.
No. Look at where I'm pointing and stop singing along to the song.
I'm saying burrito one.
Okay. That's not helping you, is it?
56 and 4.
Yeah. The 56 comes from where? Where does the 56 come from, Bethany? 8 times 7, which was 2 to the third power times 7. Where did the 7 come from, Jacob?
I can't see those. 7 came from 14.
Yep.
14.
Yep.
Yeah.
And where did the 2, why did we use 2 to the third power and not, why didn't we use this 2? Why did we use this one, Katie?
Because it has more numbers, the more 2 to the third.
Yeah. 2 to the third is bigger than 2 to the first. Yep. Now, why did we use m to the fourth instead of m to the sixth or m to the eighth? Do we use all of the m's?
No, like the one that has more m's.
Yeah, the greater what?
Multiple.
The greater
Power.
the greater power, the one with the greater exponent. Okay? Good. Turn to your assignment. Turn to page 239. The first section is using these skills to find the lowest common multiple. Okay? So they give you two numbers. Sometimes they will, you will just be able to look at the two numbers and see that because you're familiar with the multiples. And then other times you'll have to use this formula, or this method, I mean. Okay? And find a formula for it. Alright? Now, the next section is on comparing fractions. So, in example 4, it talks about how to compare fractions. When you're comparing fractions, you have to have the same denominator. So, if you're comparing 4/5 and 2/5, that's pretty simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they are both in terms of fifths. The denominator always tells you how big the pieces are. And you have to have the same size pieces in order to figure out how much you have. Alright? Guys, focus on what's going on here. Alright? That's a warning. Now, if the numbers are different, like 6/8 and 7/9, now you have to rename these fractions. You have to look at the denominators and convert these to equal fractions in order to compare the value of them. So now what we're going to be using is the lowest common multiple. Now, since you know the multiples of 8 and 9, what is the lowest common multiple? Yeah, there is. No, 8 doesn't go into 36. It has to be a number that both go into. 72. 8 times 9 is 72. Okay? So, how would we get 8 to 72? Multiply it by 9, and that's how you convert this fraction. Okay? So 6 times 9 is, oh come on people, 54. Okay, you gotta know these things. 9 times what is 72? So we multiply both by 8. And that is?
54.
No.
Oh,
72.
We already did that one.
What do you think?
We're on 7 times 8. 56. Yep. Now we can compare the pieces. And this one is less. Okay? Now, also remember that if these were negative, if we had negative 54 and negative 56, now which one is less? That would change our answer. Why? Maya? Right. Now negative 54 is greater than negative 56 because it would be a higher temperature, for example. Okay? Negative 54 is a higher temperature than negative 56 degrees. Okay? So this one has this is a lower value. So be careful when you're working on negatives there. All right? Any questions about finding equivalent fractions and then comparing those? Okay. Yeah, you have to find a common multiple. Okay, good.